When I think about the night everything changed, I don't picture the wine on my blouse first. I picture the long flight I once took alone to Times Square in New York City, the first time I ever felt truly independent. Back then, I promised myself I would never let anyone make me feel small again. Years later, it was not a stranger, but my own son and his wife who tried to crush me at my own dinner table, calling me selfish and soaking me in red wine. If you're listening to my story, tap the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far a mother's breaking point can travel. I walked into their house expecting a simple family dinner, nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just a meal where I hoped we could sit together without tension. The air smelled like roasted chicken and cheap perfume, the kind my daughter-in-law always drowned herself in before guests arrived. I had brought a small gift, nothing big, just something thoughtful for their home, hoping it might soften the coldness that had been growing between us for months. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it, that heavy, silent pressure in the room. Like something had already happened before I arrived, like I had stepped into a place where my presence had been discussed, judged, and decided before I even rang the bell. My son stood near the table, stiff, annoyed, like my being there threw off some plan he didn't want me to know about. Before I could set my gift down, he snapped at me, accusing me of being selfish, as if everything I had done for them meant nothing. The shock hit me so hard I almost dropped the box in my hand. The room spun for a second because I wasn't prepared for the attack. Not here, not at my son's table, not after everything I had sacrificed for him and his wife. My heart felt like it folded in on itself, not from anger at first, but from confusion, from the sudden realization that I wasn't welcome anymore. I stood there frozen, trying to understand what I had done wrong, trying to remember if I had said something offensive earlier in the week, or if I had forgotten some important date. But before I could even gather a single thought, his wife stepped forward, holding her glass of wine like it was a weapon she had been waiting to use. And without warning, without hesitation, she threw it at me. The cold splash hit my chest, my neck, soaking through my shirt, dripping down my arms. The sound of the glass hitting the floor echoed louder than their voices. Time slowed as the red liquid spread across the tiles. I stared at the stain on my clothes, not believing it was real, not believing the woman my son married had just done something so cruel, so childish, so unnecessary. And while I stood there dripping, trying not to cry, they watched me, not with guilt, not with regret, but with victory on their faces, like they had finally put me in my place, the kind of place they believed I belonged in. The humiliation didn't feel like a single stab. It felt like a deep cut built over years of small slights, ignored calls, unreturned messages, and quiet disrespect that had been piling up without me noticing the weight. In that moment, surrounded by the people I had once called family, I realized I was alone in a home I had helped support, a home I had contributed to, a home I had believed would always welcome me. Their eyes were cold, their posture stiff, and the room felt as if it belonged to two strangers, not to people who had shared meals, gifts, and years with me. My body felt heavy, my face burned with shame, and I could hear my own heartbeat louder than their breathing. I felt old, small, and unwanted, like a burden they were tired of carrying. And as the wine soaked deeper into my clothes, turning the fabric sticky and cold, something inside me cracked open, not from the insult itself, but from the sudden clarity that I no longer recognized my son or the life he had built. The discovery wasn't just the wine or the shouting. It was understanding that I had lost them long before this dinner. They didn't see my sacrifice. They didn't remember the times I helped them. They didn't honor the years I held them together. Instead, they stood united against me, blaming me for things I never did, twisting my love into something ugly. As I stood there trying to catch my breath, humiliation washed over me. But underneath it, a different feeling began to rise. Something sharp, something steady, something that felt like the first breath after being underwater too long. It didn't erase the pain, but it strengthened me. Because in that moment, covered in wine and betrayal, I knew one truth. I wouldn't let this be the ending. Not for me, and not for the woman they thought they could embarrass without consequence. I stood there, the wine dripping down my blouse, soaking into the fabric, slowly sliding down my arms and onto the floor. The room felt still, but inside my chest, everything was shaking. My son stood in front of me with a sharp, cold look on his face, the kind I had never seen from him in all the years I raised him. His wife stood beside him, her shoulders high, her chin lifted, watching me like she expected me to break down in front of them. But I didn't speak. I didn't move. I didn't give them what they wanted. I simply looked at both of them and felt something inside me settle. It was not peace. It was not fear. It was the first moment in a long time I felt clarity. I saw the truth of who they were in that room, and I knew something had ended. They thought their anger, their disgust, and their loud, sharp energy made them powerful. They thought the wine on my clothes made them victorious. They thought their mocking smiles meant they had control. But in that moment, I felt something stronger than their insults. I felt the weight of everything I had done for them. I remembered the meals I cooked, the gifts I gave, the money I shared, the nights I stayed awake worrying about them, the years of kindness they never returned. And now, I saw everything clearly. They never respected me. They never valued me. They never cared how much I sacrificed. They were proud of humiliating me. They enjoyed seeing me cold, wet, and embarrassed. They enjoyed watching me stand alone while they stood together, feeding off each other's cruelty. My son's eyes had a hardness that didn't belong to the boy I raised. It belonged to someone who believed he was above me, someone who believed he owed me nothing, someone who believed he could toss me aside like trash. His wife looked almost excited, as if this moment had been building inside her for months, maybe years, waiting for a chance to explode. She looked like she wanted to see me crumble, but I didn't. I stood still, letting the room grow heavier with each second of silence. The wine dried slowly on my shirt, leaving a sticky feeling on my skin. But even that discomfort felt distant compared to the sharpness of betrayal inside me. I didn't wipe it. I didn't reach for a towel. I didn't whisper an apology they didn't deserve. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask why. I didn't try to fix anything this time. I just stared at them quietly, watching their confidence glow brighter as they mistook my silence for weakness. They thought they had silenced me. They thought they had reduced me to nothing. But they didn't understand what my silence meant. It wasn't defeat. It was a warning. I let them laugh. I let them smirk. I let them turn away and roll their eyes. I let them behave like children who had no idea what storm was about to hit. I let them enjoy their moment because I knew something they didn't know. I was done being quiet. I remembered every message they sent asking for money. Every time I bailed them out. Every time I paid bills, bought groceries, fixed problems they created. I remembered every promise I kept and every promise they broke. I remembered all the chances I gave them, and I remembered the documents I kept, the receipts saved, the transfers recorded, the evidence of everything I had done for them while they stood there calling me selfish. I remembered the lawyer I trusted. I remembered the advice I had ignored until now. My son thought I stood there frozen. His wife thought she had finally destroyed my spirit. But what they didn't know was that I was deciding something important. I was done giving without respect in return. I felt my lips lift slightly, the smallest cold smile, not because I forgave them, not because I agreed with them, but because I finally understood that this moment was not the end for me. It was the beginning. They would not understand that smile until later. They would not understand that I wasn't broken. I was waking up. They would not understand that this humiliation they created would become the turning point they never expected. They would not understand that the woman standing there in silence was not the same woman they pushed away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight back. I didn't justify myself. I didn't explain my side. I didn't need to. I let the cold smile speak for me. And while they stood there feeling powerful, I stood there, already planning what came next. They just didn't know it yet. I wish I could say that night was the first time my son and his wife treated me poorly. But the truth is, it had been building slowly for years. People think disrespect arrives loudly, like thunder. But in my life, it came quietly, like small drops wearing away a stone. It started long before the wine was thrown at me. It started before the word selfish ever left my son's mouth. It began in tiny comments, small reactions, and the way they learned to look at me as if I owed them something for simply existing. I had spent decades working, saving, and making sure my family never struggled, yet somehow I became the one they believed they could treat as an easy target. Back when my son first married her, I welcomed her like a daughter. I bought them furniture when they moved into their first apartment. I helped pay for their wedding when her family refused to contribute a single dollar. I cooked meals, babysat their children, and stepped in every time they said they were too busy or too tired to manage things on their own. I didn't complain. I didn't demand anything. I loved them, and helping them felt natural to me. But slowly, I noticed things I ignored because I didn't want to accept what they meant. My daughter-in-law would roll her eyes when I gave advice. She whispered about me in the kitchen when she thought I couldn't hear. She made jokes about old people being slow, even when I stood right there. My son used to defend me, but after marriage, that faded. He started siding with her more often, laughing at things that hurt me, brushing aside my feelings as if emotions made me weak. They believed they were smarter because they were younger. They believed they were superior because they had college degrees, while I had spent years working 2 jobs to make sure they could afford those degrees. They never thought about the hands that fed them. They only looked at the hands that could continue giving. Then came the money issues. They needed help with bills, and I helped. They needed help with repairs, and I paid. They had trouble keeping up with their mortgage, and I stepped in again. Every time, they said thank you less and expected more. My kindness wasn't kindness to them. It became a habit, something they counted on, something they felt was owed. I became their safety net, their emergency fund, their backup plan. And after enough time passed, they forgot that I had a life of my own. They forgot that I had my own needs, my own struggles, and my own limits. They only saw what they wanted from me. I remember one Thanksgiving when I cooked the entire meal, cleaned the house, and hosted everyone. At the end of the night, they got up, walked out, and didn't even offer to help clean the dishes. My daughter-in-law looked around and said, "Well, you like doing this stuff anyway." I stood there, holding a stack of plates, feeling small, but I didn't say anything. I swallowed it like I swallowed every other moment of disrespect. Another time, I remember asking my son for help moving a heavy box. He sighed dramatically, told me he was busy, and then said I should learn to be more independent. The box was filled with baby clothes I had saved from when he was a child. I carried it alone, one slow step at a time, while he watched from the couch, scrolling on his phone. They forgot who raised him. They forgot who worked double shifts to keep food on the table. They forgot who sacrificed sleep, health, and years to make sure he had a better life than mine. That kind of forgetting doesn't happen overnight. It grows like weeds, slow, silent, and sharp. Even after all of this, I kept helping. I kept giving, because love can make a person blind. Love makes you excuse behavior that would never be acceptable from strangers. Love makes you believe things will get better on their own. But love also makes betrayal hurt deeper. It was never about the money. It was never about favors. It was about the respect I deserved and the gratitude they refused to show. So when my daughter-in-law threw wine at me that night, it wasn't just a splash of liquid. It was every insult they ever hid behind their smiles. It was every moment they made me feel small. It was every time they took from me without giving anything back. It was the final piece in a long puzzle of disrespect. And standing there, dripping, I realized something important. This wasn't my fault. Their behavior didn't come from one moment. It came from years of taking me for granted. And for the first time, I let myself see it clearly. The months before that awful dinner felt like small storms building into one long, heavy season. Nothing happened all at once, nothing loud, nothing dramatic enough to warn me. It was a slow drip of disrespect, a quiet erosion of love that I did not notice until the foundation was already cracking. Every family visit had changed. What used to be warm afternoons at their kitchen table slowly turned into cold moments where I was treated like someone they simply tolerated. When I walked into their home, I no longer saw excitement on their faces. I saw impatience. I saw annoyance. My son would stay on his phone while I talked, barely lifting his eyes. His wife would move around the house as if my presence created extra work for her. Small things, small gestures, but they cut deep because they came from the two people I cared for the most. I remember setting a plate on the counter once, only to see my daughter-in-law pick it up and re-wash it in front of me, as if my hands were not clean enough. She didn't say a word, but the message was clear. Another time, I offered to bring a dish for dinner, something I had cooked for years, something his late grandmother taught me, something the whole family loved. She shook her head and bought takeout instead, pretending it was easier. But I knew the truth. She didn't want anything from me. She didn't want anything connected to me, and where my son once defended me, he now stood silently beside her, letting the little insults land without care. It became normal for them to make plans without telling me. Birthdays, small holidays, even simple gatherings. I would learn about them days later through photos posted online. When I asked why I wasn't invited, they claimed it slipped their mind. But it wasn't forgetfulness, it was a pattern of leaving me out, of shrinking my place in their lives, of pushing me away slowly enough that I questioned my own feelings instead of their behavior. I began telling myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was too sensitive, too old-fashioned, too emotional. I tried to ignore the tightening in my chest every time they rolled their eyes when I shared a story. I tried to ignore the heaviness when they exchanged glances as if I did not belong in the room. Even the way they spoke to each other changed. When I entered a room, their words would lower, their conversations would pause. Sometimes my daughter-in-law would stop speaking altogether, waiting until I left before continuing. My son followed her lead more than he followed his heart. I could see how far I had fallen in his list of priorities, and I could see how easily she could bend him toward her ways. I watched him become colder, sharper, distant. I watched him forget the years I carried him, the nights I worked 2 jobs, the times I stayed awake nursing him through fevers, heartbreaks, and mistakes. All those memories faded for him, but for me, they burned even brighter as the distance grew. There were moments when he would ask me for help, little things, money for groceries, paying a bill, watching the children, yet there was never a thank you, never a moment of appreciation. The help was expected, as if I owed them for simply being in their lives. Every time I said yes, I hoped it would soften them. I hoped they would remember who I was to them. But instead, my yes became a tool they used to take more. The more I gave, the less they respected me. The more I tried to hold the family together, the more they pulled away. The people around them noticed the changes too. A neighbor once mentioned how distant my son seemed. A friend commented on how tense our lunches felt, but I always protected them, telling everyone they were just busy or stressed. I did not want anyone thinking poorly of the 2 people I loved most. I held on to hope, even when hope began slipping through my fingers. I tried to ignore the truth because admitting it felt too painful. They were growing comfortable disrespecting me. They were testing how far they could push before I broke. They were learning that I would stay quiet no matter what. They believed they had full permission to treat me any way they wished. That slow erosion was worse than any single fight, because it happened piece by piece, softly, quietly, until one day I woke up and realized something devastating. They no longer saw me as family. They saw me as an inconvenience, an obligation, a burden. And that truth hit harder than any wine thrown at me, harder than any insult spoken loudly. Because by the time the big moment arrived, the damage had already been done in silence long before. The moment the wine hit my face, everything inside me changed. It felt cold at first, then warm, then heavy as it soaked through my blouse and settled into my skin. But the real sting wasn't the liquid. The real pain was the way both of them looked at me afterward, like what they had done was nothing, like humiliating me was normal. That moment stayed frozen in time, and I stood there trying to understand how the people I had loved, supported, and lifted for years could treat me this way. I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had made for them pressing against my chest. My breath grew tight and my hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from real disappointment that had been building for years. I looked around the room as the wine continued dripping down my clothes. The table, the food, the candles, and the holiday music all continued as if nothing had happened. But in my mind, something had snapped. I saw them clearly for the first time. All the signs I had ignored, all the excuses I had made, all the nights I had cried quietly to myself, they lined up like a long hallway behind me. Tonight was not the beginning. It was the final piece in a long chain of disrespect. Their small insults, rolled eyes, and whispered comments had grown into something ugly, and this moment showed me exactly who they were. They were not losing control. They were confident. They believed I would take the humiliation again. They believed I would wipe my face, smile, and act grateful for the abuse. That belief told me everything. The smell of the wine filled the room, and I could feel it sticking to me, making me feel sticky and uncomfortable. But I stood still and let the discomfort settle into me. I needed to feel it. I needed it to remind me that this was not something small. This was not something I could ignore. My daughter-in-law's face held a small smirk as she watched me. My son didn't look sorry. He looked annoyed, as if I had forced them to behave this way, as if his wife throwing wine at me was somehow my fault. I saw no guilt, no second thoughts, and certainly no love. The anger inside me did not take the form of shouting. It took the form of clarity. Every piece of emotional pain they had caused me turned into something cold and steady. The room felt smaller and smaller as I stood there. I watched them whisper to each other, thinking I was too shocked to notice. They exchanged a few quiet gestures, likely laughing at me quietly. I could hear the faint sound of their footsteps moving away and coming back, but none of them approached me with concern. They walked around like nothing happened. That showed me that this was not an accident. This was not a moment of stress. It was intentional. They wanted to break me. They wanted to make me feel embarrassed, weak, and dependent. This was their way of gaining control. They believed I had no power left. But the truth was, their actions did not weaken me. They woke me up. All the memories of supporting my son through hard years, of helping them buy their first furniture, of paying bills when they struggled, they all returned, not as reminders of love, but as evidence of how long I had let myself be used. Every memory showed me how much I had given and how little they had appreciated. Now, I saw it clearly. They didn't see me as a mother or as family. They saw me as something they could use, and once they took everything from me, they believed they could toss me aside. My clothes were stained, my hair was wet, and my heart was tired. I felt old for the first time, not because of age, but because of the weight of betrayal. But in that same moment, I felt something stronger. I felt a rise of confidence that had been buried under years of silence. I realized that I had done enough. I had endured enough. I had tried enough, and I would never allow them to treat me like this again. Every step they had taken to break me only strengthened my resolve. My hands slowly stopped shaking. My breath grew steady. I felt calm, not weak. They didn't see the shift. They still believed they had won, that I would remain silent and compliant like always. But this moment of humiliation became the turning point. Their arrogance, their cruelty, and their belief that they could treat me however they wanted, those things would lead them to the consequences they never expected. In that room, with wine dripping onto the floor, I made a decision. I would not shout. I would not argue. I would not beg for respect. I would take the only action that would finally break their confidence. And in that quiet moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I stood there in their dining room, the smell of spilled wine still clinging to my clothes, and something inside me finally snapped into place, not out of anger, but clarity. For years, I had let things slide. Every small insult, every dismissive comment, every moment when my son and his wife acted like I was a burden instead of the woman who raised him, fed him, supported him, and helped him build the very life he now flaunted in front of me. I had excused all of it. I told myself family should be forgiven, that maybe they were stressed, tired, overwhelmed, but as the wine dripped down the front of my blouse and they stood there smirking, proud of humiliating me, I realized this wasn't a moment of anger from them. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment cruelty. This was who they had become, and I needed to stop pretending otherwise. I stepped away from the table and walked toward the small hallway near the kitchen. The same one where I used to hang my coat when they invited me over for holidays, back when they pretended to appreciate me. As I wiped the wine off my hands, my body wasn't shaking the way it normally did after confrontation. It was steady, calm, focused. I reached into my purse and took out my phone, not to call a friend, not to cry to anyone, but to look through the messages I had saved over the past year. Every rude text, every guilt trip, every moment where they mocked me for asking questions or needing help. I scrolled through them one by one, seeing them now in a new light. Not isolated incidents, but a pattern, a record of emotional abuse, proof of how they had treated me long before the wine ever splashed across the table. And then I remembered the bank transfers, the money I had loaned them when their business struggled, thousands of dollars they never paid back, money they pretended they didn't owe. Money they would laugh about, saying, "Mom will be fine, she doesn't need it." I had the receipts, the dates, the amounts, all sitting neatly in a folder on my phone, untouched and ignored for months because I never wanted to use it against them. But now I saw those records for what they really were: leverage, protection, my voice, preserved in digital ink. As I stood in that hallway, hearing distant whispers from the dining room as they laughed at me again, I realized something important. They thought I had no power. They believed I was too old, too soft, too forgiving to ever defend myself. They saw my kindness as weakness, my silence as surrender. They thought throwing wine at me would break me down so they could feel bigger, stronger, superior. But they had forgotten that I wasn't alone and I wasn't helpless. I had people who respected me. I had people who could help me. And one of them was my lawyer, a woman who had helped me draft my will, manage my investments, and protect my savings. Someone who had told me, more than once, you need to set boundaries before someone else sets them for you. I opened the message thread with her and read the last thing she'd told me months ago. If they ever overstep again, call me immediately. You have options. Tonight, they had gone far beyond overstepping. They had crossed every line a family should never cross. So I typed 3 simple words: not emotional, not dramatic, not even angry, just direct. We need talk. I didn't send it yet. I just held my thumb over the screen, feeling the power of the moment settle over me. This wasn't revenge out of spite. This was protection for my dignity, my future, and my peace. If they wanted war, I could give them paperwork. If they wanted to shout, I could give them legal silence. If they wanted to throw wine, I could throw the truth right back at them in a way they could never laugh about. I finally pressed send, knowing that message didn't just reach my lawyer. It reclaimed every piece of strength I had lost over the years. It was the moment I stopped being the target and started being the one in control. When I stepped out of their house that night, the cold air felt like a slap across my face, but it was nothing compared to the slap of betrayal I had just lived through. I stood beside my car, clothes still stained, hands trembling, but not from fear anymore. It was focus. It was clarity. It was the moment I realized I had been allowing myself to be treated like this for far too long. I opened my phone, wiping my fingers across the cracked screen, and found my lawyer's contact. For years, I had kept her number saved not for emergencies, but for protection, quiet protection from the same people who claimed to love me. Tonight, I needed that protection more than ever. I typed a message with steady fingers, describing the scene exactly as it happened. The shouting, the accusations, the wine thrown in my face, and the years of smaller humiliations that led up to this night. I sent videos, photos, and messages I had saved over the years, not because I wanted to use them, but because I always feared a moment like this would come, and it did. My lawyer replied faster than I expected, as if she had been waiting for this moment too. She asked for every detail. She asked for dates, for instances, for voice memos if I had them. And I did. Every insult, every financial manipulation, every guilt-tripping text from my son, every controlling message from his wife, all of it documented. I had never planned to use them, but life has a way of pushing you into corners you don't deserve. So I gathered it all, standing under a streetlight outside their house, watching their shadows pass behind the curtains as if nothing had happened. I sent everything quietly and calmly, letting the truth speak louder than the wine they had thrown at me. My lawyer called me next. Her voice was firm, steady, and without hesitation. She told me I had a strong case, stronger than most people in my position ever did. She said their behavior tonight was not only abusive, but humiliating enough to warrant legal action. She said I had grounds to file for a restraining order, to reclaim financial losses, even to demand repayment for money I had given them over the years under false promises. But I wasn't thinking about money in that moment. I was thinking about respect, the kind they had never given me, even after everything I had done for them. My lawyer told me I had every right to take control of the situation, and for the first time in years, I realized she was right. I didn't have to accept what they had done. I didn't have to be silent. As I sat inside my car, engine off, lights dim, I listened carefully to every option she laid out for me. Legal letters, recorded confrontations, documented damages, civil claims, protective measures. Every suggestion sounded like a path to freedom, not revenge, but freedom from the cycle of disrespect. She asked if I was ready to proceed, ready to stand up for myself in a way I never had before. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel scared. I felt strong, stronger than the wine dripping down my coat, stronger than their insults, stronger than the years I spent shrinking myself just to keep peace. I told her yes. Yes, I wanted to take action. Yes, I wanted everything documented. Yes, I wanted them held accountable. She instructed me to drive to the nearest well-lit public place, to draft an official statement and send one last piece of evidence. The dress stained with red wine, photographed clearly under a streetlight. I did exactly that. I took photos from every angle, showing not just the damage, but the cruelty behind it. She told me she would prepare the first formal notice that same night. She told me she would send it to their email addresses and physical mailbox before they even woke up the next morning. She told me that once the notice was delivered, they would realize their mistake, not my fate. As I hung up, I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not revenge, just strength, quiet, steady, and long overdue. I put my phone down, leaned back, and breathed for the first time in hours. They thought throwing wine at me would humiliate me. Instead, they handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to take back my dignity. My lawyer said she would handle everything from this point forward, that I didn't need to confront them again unless I wanted to. She said they would learn their lesson, not from shouting, not from fighting, but from the truth, delivered legally and calmly, the way real justice arrives. And I believed her, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother. I was a woman standing up for herself, and I wasn't turning back. When the warning letter finally reached them, everything changed in a single moment. I was not there in person when it happened, but the fallout reached me almost instantly, carried through a dozen frantic calls, scattered messages, and sudden silence where arrogance used to live. My son and his wife had always acted like nothing could touch them, like they were too secure, too confident, too protected behind their own pride to ever believe someone like me would take a stand. They believed I would stay quiet forever, that I would accept every insult, every dismissal, every moment of humiliation, as if it were normal. But when that letter arrived, their world shifted, and the control they thought they had over me slipped from their hands faster than they could grasp it. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I heard my phone buzzing over and over again. I didn't rush to pick it up. I didn't feel nervous or guilty. I simply let it ring until it stopped. Because this time, the panic wasn't mine. It belonged to them. I could almost picture their faces slowly losing color as each line of that legal notice unfolded the truth they never expected to face. It spelled out everything clearly. The financial help I had given them over the years, the documented evidence of emotional mistreatment, the messages that revealed their disrespect, the recorded moments that showed their intention to belittle, mock, and isolate me. Every piece was laid out cleanly and sharply, like a mirror reflecting their own behavior back at them. As the reality sank in, they realized what they had done wasn't just rude or disrespectful, it was legally reckless. They had taken advantage of me financially, treated me poorly emotionally, and attempted to intimidate me socially. And now, all of it was in the hands of someone who knew exactly how to present it with power. My lawyer had been thorough. He had made sure the language was strong, firm, and undeniable. The letter wasn't just a warning, it was an ultimatum, a line drawn so straight and so sharp that they couldn't pretend not to see it. My son called first. I didn't answer. His wife texted next. I didn't reply. They tried calling again, this time more urgently, probably hoping they could convince me to take things back, undo everything, or soften the situation before it reached a point they couldn't control. But I had no interest in their panic. I wasn't looking for confrontation. I wasn't looking for a fight. All I wanted was for them to understand that I wasn't powerless, that I wasn't voiceless, and that I wasn't someone they could throw around whenever they felt angry or bored. I had spent years being quiet, years avoiding conflict, years trying to preserve peace, even when it came at the cost of my dignity. But the wine they threw at me, the smirks, the insults, it had all built to this moment, and now the consequences were theirs alone. When my lawyer called to tell me they had received the letter and were already asking what they could do to fix things, I simply listened calmly. He said they were surprised, shaken, unsure how far I was willing to go, and he told them the truth, that everything depended on me. For the first time, the power was in my hands, not theirs. The balance had shifted completely. They thought they could break me easily, push me into silence, make me feel small, but all they had done was push me toward a point where their cruelty finally met a boundary. Later that evening, their tone began to change. The frantic calls turned into nervous ones. The nervous ones turned into apologetic ones. And the apologetic ones came with attempts at explanations. I didn't respond to those either, because this wasn't about apologies spoken in panic. This was about respect, real respect, something they had never given me when they felt secure. Now, stripped of that imaginary safety, they finally realized what I had been quietly holding back all along. The ultimatum stood firm. They were to stop all abusive behavior, acknowledge the financial support I provided, reimburse certain amounts that had been misused, and attend a mediated meeting with my lawyer present. If they refused, legal action would continue without hesitation. That was the agreement. Clear, simple, and non-negotiable. As I sat there in my quiet kitchen, the evening light fading gently against the walls, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not control over others, not control through fear, but control over myself. Control over my boundaries. Control over the way I allowed people to treat me. My son and his wife had pushed me too far, but now they finally knew the truth. I may have been quiet, but I was never weak. I may have been patient, but I was never blind. And I may have loved them, but I would never again let that love be used as a weapon against me. In that moment, as the calls kept buzzing and buzzing, I let the phone sit untouched, because at last, they were the ones left waiting. When the lawyer's letter finally reached their inbox, everything shifted. The same people who had laughed at me just hours earlier were now scrambling like frightened children. I saw the panic the moment they called me. Their voices didn't sound strong or confident anymore. There was no yelling, no mocking tone, no sharp words meant to cut me down. Instead, there were long pauses, choked breaths, and attempts to speak softly, like they suddenly remembered I was their family. My son's wife, who had proudly thrown wine at me, could barely form a sentence. She kept saying it was a misunderstanding, that she didn't mean it, that emotions were high and things had gotten out of hand. But words didn't erase the sting of humiliation on my skin. Words didn't erase the memory of wine dripping down my face while they smirked. Words didn't erase years of disrespect. My son tried to explain his behavior too. He talked about stress, responsibilities, pressure, and how he didn't realize how his words could hurt me. But I stayed silent. I didn't give them comfort. I didn't rush to make them feel better. Their fear wasn't my burden. Their guilt wasn't my job to soothe. For once in this family, I was the one with power, not because I wanted revenge, but because they had finally pushed me too far. They learned that even a quiet woman can draw a line and enforce it. My lawyer had made everything perfectly clear in the letter. No more insults, no more public humiliation, no more financial exploitation, no more using my kindness as their personal convenience. Any future disrespect would result in formal action, and the evidence I had collected over the years was more than enough to support it. And suddenly, my son didn't think I was selfish anymore. Suddenly, his wife didn't think I was dramatic or sensitive anymore. They were terrified of the consequences that were now real, written, and documented. They knew exactly what they had to lose, and they finally understood that my silence all these years was not weakness. It was restraint. I listened as their tone shifted from excuses to apologies, from apologies to promises, from promises to quiet begging. They wanted the conflict to end quickly, neatly, without anything official happening. They wanted the threat to disappear. They wanted the control back. But I wasn't the same woman they thought they could order around. I stayed calm. I stayed firm. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't get emotional. I simply reminded them that actions have consequences, and respect is not something they can choose to give only when it benefits them. Respect is a requirement, not a favor. They asked if they could come over to apologize in person. I told them no. They asked if I wanted to talk things out as a family. I told them no. They asked if we could pretend this never happened. I told them the truth. I would never pretend again. For the first time in years, my boundaries were not just emotional, but legal, and the fear in their voices told me they finally understood what that meant. In the days that followed, I walked around my home with a peace I had not felt in a long time. There was no more trembling in my hands, no more knot in my stomach, no more replaying every rude comment or every disrespectful moment. I wasn't scared of them anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next insult. I wasn't trying to earn their love or approval. Instead, they were the ones walking carefully, choosing their words, thinking twice before assuming they could treat me however they pleased. The balance had shifted, and I didn't feel guilty for it. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel cold. I felt protected. I felt strong. I felt like I had finally taken back pieces of myself I had been giving away for years. At the end of the week, I received flowers. Cheap ones, not thoughtful ones. Attached was a card from my daughter-in-law. She wrote that she was deeply sorry and truly ashamed. She wanted another chance, but I didn't rush to reply. Sometimes silence is the strongest message of all, and I was finally learning how to use it. When everything was finally over and the noise from that terrible night had settled into memory, I sat alone in my living room and tried to understand how the people I loved most had turned into the source of my deepest humiliation. It wasn't the wine on my clothes that stayed with me. It wasn't the shouting or the accusations or the look of satisfaction on their faces when they thought they had broken me. What stayed with me was the moment I chose to take my life back. That quiet second when I opened my phone, wiped the wine from my screen and called someone who respected me more than my own family ever had. That was the moment I stopped being their victim and started being my own protector. In the days that followed, I could feel a shift inside me. I walked slower, but I held my head higher. I slept with the lights off again because I no longer feared the thoughts that waited in the dark. I visited my lawyer twice more, reviewing the messages, the recordings, the financial history I had kept without ever realizing how important it would be. He looked at me like I was a woman who had finally remembered her worth, and in a way, I had. Life with my son and his wife had been full of small humiliations. Every dinner where they rolled their eyes, every holiday where my gift was compared to someone else's, every little comment about me being too emotional, too old, or too fragile. Those words had piled up like stones, slowly building a wall around me. I never noticed it until I was standing at the bottom, staring up. But now, after everything, I had a new kind of power. The power to say no, no to being walked on, no to being disrespected, no to being treated like a nuisance in a life I helped build. And that power didn't come from anger, it came from clarity. My son and his wife apologized, of course. They sent messages full of excuses and long explanations. They said it was the stress and the wine and a misunderstanding. People always reach for excuses when they fear consequences. People always try to soften their cruelty when it threatens their comfort. But apologies that come only after fear are not apologies. They are survival tactics. And I finally stopped mistaking them for love. I didn't block them. I didn't scream back. I didn't run to anyone for validation. I simply responded with the truth. I told them I needed time to heal, time to rebuild my peace, time to decide whether they deserved to be in my life at all. And the silence that followed wasn't painful. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I had room to breathe. I could make my coffee without feeling judged. I could sit at my table without feeling like an outsider in my own family. I could look at the mirror and not see someone who gave too much. I saw a woman who finally gave something to herself. The lesson in all of this wasn't about money or lawyers or winning. It was about dignity. The dignity you lose slowly when you let others speak to you in ways they shouldn't. The dignity you give up when you shrink yourself to keep the peace. The dignity you sacrifice when you mistake tolerance for love. And the dignity you reclaim when you finally say enough. I learned that boundaries are not about shutting people out. They are about protecting the parts of yourself that life has already made fragile. I learned that being a mother does not mean allowing your child to hurt you. I learned that age does not mean weakness. Sometimes it means you've simply been carrying far more than anyone realized. And most importantly, I learned this. When someone shows you that they think your kindness is a weakness, you show them that your strength is greater than their cruelty. I didn't tell this story to get revenge or sympathy. I tell it because women my age forget their own power. We give and give, thinking love will return to us in the same shape we offered it. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it returns sharp and cold. And when that happens, we must be brave enough to protect ourselves, even from the people we birthed, raised, or welcomed into our homes. In the end, I didn't just reclaim my respect, I reclaimed my voice. And now, every step I take feels lighter. Every breath feels fuller. Because I know the truth. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And sometimes it is the only way to teach others how to love you the right way.